Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Dubai Airshow, where our coverage is sponsored by FLIR, and we're here at the Aerospace Industries Association Chalet in the Apollo 1 Memorial Boardroom to talk to Remy Nathan, who's the Vice President International here at AIA, the man who has fought many battles to reform the U.S. arms export control system. Remy, thanks very much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Vago.
I know that it's been a busy show, although it's a little bit slower than I think that we've been used to from Dubai. I mean, it reminds us of where we were, maybe a decade or so ago. A lot of activity 4 years ago, a lot of activity 2 years ago, and then we saw a series of very big orders from a lot of the countries in the region, Saudis, Emiratis, Kuwaitis, and others. There are other deals brewing, still a lot of interest, but generally kind of a very soft, very muted show, particularly on defense. Probably the biggest order was that $1.6 billion order that Lockheed landed to upgrade the Block 60 F-16s in the UAE Air Force. Talk to us a little bit about some of the dynamics that you're hearing from your membership, representing everything from the biggest companies to smaller ones, about sort of what their perceptions are about this year's show.
So I think we're seeing a lot of opportunity here, certainly. But as you just mentioned, in terms of the sales, the announcements, not as much as has been in previous shows. I would attribute that to the fact that the administration has been indicating quite strongly its commitment to security cooperation, building partner capacity with our allies. Certainly the President's most recent trip to Asia featured many of those same themes. But I think there's still a lot of positions that still need to be filled in the administration, some more architecture that needs to be put together to help make manifest the commitments that they have and the plans that they have to try to enhance security cooperation and enhance defense exports in the United States. So I think what we're seeing right now is more of a kickoff to what we will see quite shortly, I think, the next phase of the administration's plans to try to enhance this kind of activity. Most notably, a lot of conversation that's been taking place about a potential initiative which will involve more of the whole of government. And these are the kinds of themes that have been reflected by the administration officials that have been here.
We saw Ellen Lord here, who's the last Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. Before she takes the acquisition and sustainment job, Congress ordered that job split to the research and development and technology side of it, and then the acquisition and support side of it. Talking about arms export cooperation, there hasn't been, I'm sort of struck at how little conversation there was, but there are some key players that are in position. John Rood will be, if everything works out right, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, a longtime hand, served in the Bush administration, was the Lockheed International chief, so that was a key job where he understood both the interests of industry and knows government very well. You've got retired United States Navy Vice Admiral Joe Rixey, who's former DSCA head of the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, who's in that special assistant, unique new special assistant role to Secretary Mattis to work security cooperation issues more broadly. And I know you've met with them and others, folks in the White House as well, where
General Hooper.
General Hooper was here as well, absolutely. It's been a while that we've seen an Army DSCA chief, but certainly, you didn't go 10 feet without either having been somewhere he was or, right. Covered a lot of ground here. But, do we understand the contours of what the administration actually wants to do when it comes across to the whole piece on how to approach this, aside from the top line thing? The last administration, where you worked on an advisory capacity, as you did in the last administration, to sort of shape policy, took it very seriously, very early, came out of the blocks talking about the importance of that, and we saw sort of concrete things starting to happen. Bill Lynn was deputy secretary at the time and sort of spearheaded that. Mm-hmm. What are we seeing about what the new thing looks like that the old thing wasn't?
Sure. So I would contrast many of the efforts that took place in first the previous Bush administration into the Obama administration as a growing awareness that we have to do better. We have to find a way to make this system more predictable, efficient, and transparent. So certainly initial focus on pretty concrete, in-the-weeds sort of things like export control reform. Gradually broadening out to perhaps some more larger scale, more strategic issues where people started talking more about FMS reform. In fact, as you recall, quite a lot of discussion coming out 2 years ago when Secretary of the Air Force Debbie James came to this show, engaged with industry, and heard quite a bit about the fact that the system and the lack of speed was compromising, in industry's view, not just our competitiveness, but our influence in the region. So good attention being paid to parts of the system. I think what you're seeing now, though, is a recognition that there's a system-wide challenge and a system-wide opportunity that we need to try to take forward. And I think that's best exemplified with the kind of tone from the top statement that you've heard and people are talking about from Secretary Mattis, where partnership is one of his 3 pillars. And that's a change, I think. The elevation of this issue to something that is not meant to be piecemeal, that's not meant to be episodic, that it actually needs to be more in the forefront of the administration's focus and its policies and its regulatory reform activities. Now, I would agree with you. We don't yet have the specifics, but the fact that this issue is being talked about at that level on a more consistent basis, that it's being talked about within the White House on a more consistent basis, is a welcome change. We now need to take the next step to actually add some details to the way forward.
Exactly, because Alex Gray, former Randy Forbes staffer, is over doing that job from an industrial base perspective, and certainly looking at the issue. So, what are the details you're looking for?
So there's plenty of opportunity to make the system better. And certainly industry is not short of ideas, and neither is the government. I think there's an opportunity here to try to meet each other halfway, to try to find ways to improve what government's doing, certainly, but also to have industry be more aligned with the direction that government wants to go. Big picture, I genuinely believe that we need to get to a point where there is a greater common understanding within the interagency about what our priorities are. Certainly with so many different parts of the system, they optimize different things, they prioritize different things. And it's a challenge within their system, it's a challenge for industry to try to get those priorities to align. So a better commonality of understanding and communication of what those priorities are back to industry at the big picture level, I think is a great place to start. On a more tactical level, we're looking for efforts, for instance, to try to streamline FMS contracting. Ellen Lord, of course, is very keen on trying to improve the acquisition system, and with her business background and I think her commitment to reform, she's trying to translate the kinds of words that we've heard in the past, and I think everyone understands that there's a way of doing it better, to a metrics-oriented approach. What are we going to do? Let's measure it and see if we have success. If not, what's the next thing we can try to accomplish? And she's going to engage industry very closely on that matter. And then the third piece I'll talk about, tech transfer. Certainly in this part of the world, and certainly at this show, very much struck by a lot of the conversation about UAVs. And certainly there's quite a significant exhibit here of Chinese capability in that regard. We've been saying for a number of years in industry that the missile technology control regime, the U.S. policy, based on our adherence to that regime, need to reflect more accurately the marketplace, but also need to reflect more accurately America's interest in selling that technology to our allies and partners, not just the risk of transferring technology from a proliferation perspective.
Well, I mean, this goes to what John Hamre was talking about 20 years ago, which is managing to end up controlling something so tightly you end up with nothing, right? Because your ally has a vote, and he can go and do anything that he wants. And in the case of the UK and some of our close allies, the battle was not so much in the administration, but it was in Congress. Bush administration had a lot of sweeping reforms. You and I had some friends on the Senate side in particular, but some also on the House side, who were virulently opposed to doing that because for a whole variety of reasons. Where are we congressionally on this? because ultimately it's Congress that has to rewrite the law in order to be able to. MTCR is a little bit different because we're signatory to an international agreement. The question is whether others are abiding by that international agreement or not.
Correct.
But from a specific standpoint of a presumption of denial, for example, for some of these aerial systems, talk to us about how, you talk to members of Congress regularly, you talk to staffers regularly. There is a sense from some that there is a motion, an interest in change, but then you talk to some staffers who are just like, well, the law works and we're not gonna be, rampant out there. Talk to us about what the mood in Congress is for the kind of reform that's necessary and our allies have been calling for now for 25 years that you and I have been talking about this.
So I think we're benefiting from a lot of the work and a lot of the communication that has been taking place over the last couple of years. And I think the members of Congress have come to realize over these years that it is possible to have reform while still maintaining good control that is appropriate to the technologies that we're talking about. As well, that, as I said before, there's a risk in not transferring this technology to other countries. So we're able to marry the specific arguments and the merits of UAVs and UAV exports to that body of work that's already taken place. And in that sense, I think we have a bit more of a receptive audience among members of Congress. It also helps, I think, that even in the last couple of years, as the debate and discussion about UAVs have taken place, I think we've passed the tipping point of looking at these technologies from a perspective of fear and a perspective of risk, whether it's from safety or privacy or so on, to more of an anticipation of the benefits that this technology is going to provide to society once it becomes more normalized and integrated into the current airspace and operations and so on. And I think transferring that technology therefore becomes less of a unusual or scary thing to contemplate, and perhaps more akin to the idea of, is it a good idea to sell an armed fighter? Okay, is it a good idea to sell an unarmed UAV? There was a time when the perception of selling the unarmed UAV was a far riskier proposition, just from a perception point of view, than actual risk. I think that's changing.
And the market's driving that change, right? I mean, we've
Yes.
controlled night vision to the point where we have lost our preeminent position in night vision. You look at that from an unmanned aircraft standpoint, where some of our closest allies in this region are buying Chinese in volume and bigger aircraft, not just for the small stuff. We saw Saudi Arabia, which may be a little more politically driven, go to the triple-digit system, Russian system of all things. When it comes to the cooperation issue, the Emirates is UAE is a visionary nation, and you can argue that among the more visionary of them is Mohammed bin Rashid, who's the emir here of Dubai, with some very, very lofty goals. The Million Coder Initiative, for example, and this entire drive, investing in EDIC, for example, like with Royal Charter, drive this change really rapidly, and let's get and build and make in the country as much as we can. And that's, companies are a little bit dual view of that. On the one hand, they're very encouraging of it. On the other hand, it also presents certain challenges of moving work, losing work domestically, especially in this administration. If folks get wind that you're shifting work offshore, can be a little bit of a challenge, even though it's the right and the most positive thing to do that goes with it. What are some of the challenges associated with this? Because in order to do some of this stuff, there are going to be guys from U.S. production lines that are going to have to see less in order to shift some of that work. India, if it picks F-16s, I mean, it's already almost understood that the F-16 line effectively moves to India. That's something that was discussed in the last administration, and other nations have done that with tank lines and other things. But this is a little bit dicier of a thing with a president that's made, sort of America first kind of mindset. Talk to us a little bit about the challenges, intellectually and otherwise, that companies face in this sort of clearly international business environment, at the same time with some domestic political pressures that could put some pressure on them.
Well, let's talk about the political dynamics of this first. I am actually pleased that in the conversations that have taken place and the commentary from this administration about things like you mentioned, the idea of a production line in India, for an American fighter, that there's actually support for that as a concept, because there's an understanding that, you know, this is a line that is driven by international sales. More importantly, there is a long tail attached to these systems that is overwhelmingly American. So by being able to continue the production and the use of these systems internationally, you're actually going to be sustaining a significant amount of work that currently is taking place within the United States. And it's on balance going to be a net positive, or at least sustaining the current positive that is taking place in American manufacturing. When it comes to how industry is responding to the sort of make in, fill in the blank here approach, the difference is, I think that's always been the goal of many countries that we've been working with. These countries are moving up the technological scale. And so in many cases, their expectations, their demands are growing in sophistication and complexity. On the one hand, the good news is they're also developing the capacity of being a more integral part of the global supply chain of many of our companies. And certainly the UAE, with the commitment from the leadership and the talent that exists here in this country, is well poised to take advantage of that and to become more of a player in the international aerospace and defense global supply chain. There's still the concerns and the challenges that industry faces when it comes to this kind of technology transfer and the industrial participation remain the same, and that is, we are best served if the partner is able and willing to be flexible, to work with us on a proposition of mutual benefit, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to achieve here is a sustainable partnership. And if the terms under which this industrial participation activity takes place doesn't accrue benefit to both sides of the equation, you're not going to get the kind of sustainability that we seek.
Remy, thanks very much. We really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you back in Washington.
Sounds good. Thank you, Vago.